Tuesday marked hours of courtroom testimony from the loved ones of Ella Jackson, leading up to the sentencing of her husband, Glenn Jackson, the Eastern Kentucky University professor charged in her death.
I miss her very much.
From virtual statements from Ella Jackson's family in Ukraine to a recorded statement from her and Glenn Jackson's youngest son, who had just started kindergarten when she was killed.
You should have been here for my childhood, my teenage years, my future. Glenn took all that away. He took away her future. He took away the future I should have had with her.
Ella's ex-husband, Jason Hans, also went before the courtroom, speaking about how he stepped up to raise Ella and Glenn's youngest son since Glenn's arrest in 2020.
Every night at bedtime, he would eagerly ask for story after story about her until he fell asleep. After many weeks, I could no longer think of new stories to tell him.
Earlier this year, Glenn Jackson accepted an Alford plea, which is where someone doesn't admit guilt, but admits prosecutors have enough evidence to convict them. Those main pieces of evidence were a knife and a significant amount of Ella's blood found in Glenn's car. But given the state of her remains, officials have not been able to confirm how she died.
We were left with nothing but a box of bones buried.
Glenn's murder charge was also amended to first-degree manslaughter, which offered him 14 years behind bars. And ultimately, that's what the judge agreed to as well. Jackson will serve 14 years behind bars for manslaughter, corpse abuse, and evidence tampering.
I would never describe what happened in this case as justice. Our experience with the legal system has repeatedly left us, Ella's family, feeling victimized all over again. Not because we expect unmitigated vengeance or an eye for an eye, but because thus far it has felt as though Mr. Jackson's comfort, convenience, and liberty have been valued more than Ella's life.
In Madison County, Alyssa Williams, WK1.